The major sociological perspective on education falls under three categories: functional, conflict, and symbolic interaction approaches. These have been given by Valentine and Hammack in 2012. First, I give you a theoretical snapshot of these three: functionalism, conflict theory, and interaction. Now, the functionalism theory, according to functionalism, education serves several functions of the society. These include: number one, socialization; B, social integration; C, social placement; social and cultural innovations. Later functions include child care, the establishment of peer relationship, and lowering unemployment by keeping high school students off the full-time labor force. Problems in the educational institutions harm society because all these functions cannot be completed and fulfilled. So this is the functionalism approach of education, that you have to fulfill the function of the society. So education for the socialization process, for the social integration of different social groups, and then social placement, and then social and cultural innovations, then child care, then there is a unemployment, help in lowering the unemployment by keeping high school students not always in the labor force, but also during the school time. So these are the functions of functional. Then second comes the conflict theory. Education promotes such inequality through the use of tracking and standard leadership and the impact of its hidden curriculum. And the impact of hidden curriculum. Schools differ widely in their funding and learning conditions, and this type of inequity leads to learning disparities that reinforce social inequality. तो conflict theory भी है कि inequality पैदा होती है, different types of schools हैं, different type of culture है, different type purpose हैं schools के, तो they differ in their funding and they differ in their learning condition, and that causes the conflict theory. Third is symbolic interaction. In symbolic interaction, the prespective focus on the social interaction in the classroom. Symbolic interaction का मतलब है कि whatever goes in the classroom, the social interaction in the classroom, so with the teacher, with the other students, and it is inside the classroom and it is outside the classroom. It may be in the playground, it may be in the laboratory, it may be other school venues. Specific research finds that social interaction in schools affect the development of gender roles and that teachers' expectations of pupils' intellectual abilities affect how much pupils learn. Certain education problems have their basis in social interaction and expectation. तो कई problems पैदा होती हैं in the development of a child due to the symbolic interaction, due to the social interaction. So these education problems give rise on the basis of interaction and expectations. The functions of education. Function theory stresses the functions of education serves in fulfilling a society's needs. As the first need is socialization. Perhaps the most important function of education is socialization. If children are to learn the norms, values and skills, the need to function in society, then education is primary vehicle for such learning, that is socialization. School teach the three are reading, writing and arithmetic, as we all know, but they also teach many of the society norms and values. In United States, these norms and values include respect for authority, patriotism, remember the pledge of allegiance, punctuality and competition to grades and sports. So these are the things in the United States. In every country, there are different norms, there are different values which are stressed through the process of education. And second function of education is social integration. Now this is again important function, that is social integration. What is social integration? Social integration for society to work, functionalists say people must subscribe to common set of beliefs and values. As we saw, development of such common views was a goal of the system of free compulsory education that developed in the 19th century. Thousands of immigrant children in the United States and in India even today are learning English, US history, Indian history and other subjects that help prepare them for the workforce and integrate them into the Indian or American life. Wherever, if it is in India, Indian life, if it is in America, American life. A third function of education is social placement. Beginning in the grade school, students are identified by teachers and other school officials either as bright and motivated or less bright and less educationally challenged. Depending on how they are identified, children are taught at the level that is thought to suit them best. In this way, they are presumably prepared for their later station and later status in the life. Whether the process works as well as it should, an important issue, and we explore it further when we discuss school tracking later on. Social and cultural innovation is the fourth function of the education. Our scientists cannot make important scientific discoveries, and our artists and thinkers cannot come up with great works of art, poetry, and of innovations and prose unless they are first been educated in many subjects they need to know for their chosen path. So these are the four functions we have discussed. First is socialization, second is social integration, third is social placement, and fourth is social and cultural innovation. So these are the four functions of education for which education is provided. Education also involves several latent functions that are byproduct of going to school and receiving an education rather than a direct effect of education itself. One of these is child care. Once a child starts kindergarten and then first grade, for several hours a day the child is taken care of for free. The establishment of peer relationship is another latent function of schooling. Most of us met many of our friends while we are in school at whatever grades level, and some of those friendship endure the rest of our lives. A final latent function of education is that it keeps millions of high school students out of the full-time labor force. The fact keeps the unemployment rate lower than it would have been if everybody is in the not in the school but in the labor force. Because education serves as many manifest and latent functions of society, problem in schooling ultimately harm society. For education to serve it many functions, these many functions, then has to function society, problem in schooling ultimately harm society. For education to serve its many functions, various kinds of reforms are needed to make our school and the process of education as effective as possible. Now sometimes, education is sometimes related with inequality. Students are not getting the same type education. Some receive better education and others does not receive better education. So this is how there is inequality. Conflict theory does not dispute the function just described. So ये निगेटिव ये स्कूल के function नहीं. However, it does give some of them a different slant of emphasizing how education perpetuates social inequality. Again given by Ballantyne and Hammack in 2012, and J.H.A. Hammack and F.M. those are para. The sociology of education, a systematic analysis, upper saddle river जगह के नाम. One example of this process involves the function of school placement. When most schools begin tracking their students in grade schools, the students thought by their teachers to be bright and placed in the passer track, especially in the reading and arithmetic, while the slower students are placed in the slower track in high school. Three common tracks are for the college track: vocational track and general track. Such tracking does have its disadvantages and advantages. It helps ensure that bright students learn as much as their abilities allow them, and it helps ensure that slower students are not taught over their heads. But conflict theories say that the tracking also helps perpetuate social inequality by locking students in faster and lower tracks. Worse yet, several students show that students' social class and race and function strictly after the track which they are placed, even though their intellectual abilities and potential should be the only things that matter. While middle class students are more likely to be tracked up, while poorer students and students of color are more likely to be tracked down. Once they are tracked, students learn more if they are tracked up and less if they are tracked down. The latter tend to lose self-esteem and begin to think they have little academic ability and thus do worse in school because they were tracked down. In this way, tracking is thought to be good for those tracked up and bad for those tracked down. So conflict theorists thus say that tracking perpetuates social inequality based on social class and race and ethnically people belonging to higher groups and belonging to lower groups. To educational differentiation are defective strategy. Conflict theorists add that standard tests are culturally biased and thus also help in perpetuating inequality. The tests have been made on are biased. They are not culture free. They are culture biased. So those tests which are culture biased, they help in increasing the social distance. Now, testing and social stratification in American education, annual review of sociology shows, according to this criticism, these tests favor while middle-class students whose socioeconomic status and other aspects of their background have afforded them various experience that help them answer questions on the test. A third critique of the conflict theory involves in the quality of schools. Now, as we see later in this chapter, U.S. schools differ mightily in their resources, learning conditions, and other aspects. Not only in USA, everywhere this is there that some schools have better resources, other schools have less resources, some have better learning conditions, others have less better learning conditions, and other aspects, all of which affect how much students can learn. And then simply put, schools are unequal and their very inability helps perpetuate inequality in the larger society. Children going to the worst school in urban areas, going to the worst schools even in urban areas, face many more obstacles to their learning than those going to well-funded schools in suburban areas. Their lack of learning helps ensure they remain trapped in poverty and its related problems. It is fourth anti-critique. Conflict theories say that schooling teaches a hidden curriculum by which they mean a set of rules and set of values and set of beliefs that support the status quo, including the existing social hierarchy, socialization, gender, and the hidden curriculum of high stakes telling. Although no one plots this behind closed doors, or school children learn patriotic values and respect for their authority. A final critique in historical and concern the rise of free compulsory education during the 19th century. 19th centuries, the values conflict theories see its origin as smacking of patriotism, thus believe that one's own group is superior to another group. They also criticize its intention to teach workers the skills they needed for the new industrial economy. Because most workers were very poor in this economy, these critics say compulsory education served the interests of the upper capitalist class much more than it served the interests of workers. symbolic interaction and school behavior. Symbolic interaction studies of education examine social interaction in the classroom, on the playground, and in other school venues. These studies help to understand what happens as in the school themselves, but they also help to understand how what occurs in school is relevant for the large society. Some studies, for example, show how the playground activities reinforce gender role socialization. Girls tend to be play more cooperative games, while boys play more competitive games. So this is how gender inequality there. The girls show different type of things, and boys give different types of things. So this is how these are the four things. One is socialization, then is integration, then social innovations, and then social conflict theory, integration theory, conflict theory, and symbolic theory. These are the four types of functions of the education. So sociology of education affects the education system, and all the four functions. The first function of school is socialization. Second function is the integration. Third function is the innovations and the enhancement of society, and lowering of employment, child care, and these are the additional functions of schooling. So this is all about approaches to socialization of education. So there are four approaches as we have discussed it. The approaches are, as I said, these are the four approaches. Socialization पहला है, social interaction दूसरा है, social placement तीसरा है, social and cultural innovation चौथा है. ये four functions हैं जो school fulfills. Thank you very much.